This story didn't happen to me, but when it was told to me, I didn't doubt its truth for a second. In the summer of 2009, I went to visit my grandmother in the remote mountain town in Appalachia, West Virginia. The kind of place where self-service dies and everyone knows everyone's business. There, through a lucky coincidence, I met a great local girl named Chloe. Chloe had an older brother named Luke. He was built like a brick outhouse, a real mountain man. At first, he glared at me like a wolf, and there were even a few threats, but eventually, we found common ground. Luke turned out to be a normal guy, and one fine day, we agreed to go fishing together at the local lake. The sun was beating down relentlessly. The fish were biting reluctantly, and the mosquitoes were eating us alive. Thank God Luke brought along a cure for the sweltering boredom. A large mason jar of strong homemade local moonshine. We quickly finished it off, the liquid burning our throats. After that, we kind of stopped caring about the fish, and we started chatting about everything. Suddenly, Luke became very serious. His gaze darkened, and he told me a story that happened to him before he ever met me. Luke had a childhood friend named Tommy. The two of them were inseparable back in the day. They often visited abandoned forest cabins miles off the main road, looking for old coins, antique bottles, or copper wire to scrap for cash. One dead of night, fueled by boredom and cheap beer, they decided to explore an old, rotting, uninhabited house that was located deep in the woods. They approached the house and pulled the front door. It was locked. They walked around the house and saw a window that had been ripped out along with its frame. The guys climbed inside through it. Inside the house, the air was thick with dust and the smell of rot. Everything was turned upside down. Dirty, mildewed sheets were scattered across the floor. A rusted iron bed was flipped over, and the heavy wooden table was broken in half. While they were sifting through the trash in the pale beams of their flashlights, they suddenly started hearing some noise from outside. At first, they thought it was a wild dog or a coyote, but they still decided to lay low and turn off the lights. Luke told me that for some reason, at that exact moment, a chilling fear pierced his soul. The noise outside wouldn't stop. In the absolute suffocating silence of the Appalachian night, you could clearly hear thick, dry branches snapping loudly under someone's feet. And suddenly, it dawned on Luke. A dog or a coyote cannot be that heavy. Whatever was walking outside was massive, and it was walking on two legs. The footsteps were slow, heavy, and deliberate, pacing back and forth in front of the porch. At that very moment, Luke became truly terrified. His mouth went completely dry, and his heart started hammering against his ribs. Then Luke noticed his friend. Tommy was standing motionless, staring at a single spot, and his face was completely contorted with unspeakable terror. Luke slowly turned his head at the exact same spot. He froze, staring right at them through the empty, shattered window with the massive god's face. It wasn't just an animal. It was too high off the ground, hunched over broad humanoid shoulders. Its face was pale, covered in filthy, matted fur that reeked of copper and wet earth. But the worst part was the eyes. Human eyes, but with horizontal pupils gleaming with a sickly, intelligent malice. Running out of the house was terrifying because that thing was standing right outside the only exit. They just stood frozen in the dark, trapped, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, the god's face slowly lowered down and disappeared into the shadows. Dead silence fell over the woods. Tommy and Luke continued to stand like statues, afraid to even breathe. About 5 minutes passed. Nothing happened. They nervously started to think that everything was fine and the creature had left. But suddenly, from outside, right next to the closed front door, someone yelled. It was a macabre, distorted voice. It sounded like a vocal cord trying to mimic a human, but it was pitched wrong, vibrating in a demonic register.
Open the door, or it's going to be worse.
Right after those words, something started slamming into the old wooden door. The blows were of such inhuman, explosive strength that the entire cabin shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Tommy went into full hysterics. He dropped his flashlight and started sobbing uncontrollably, covering his ears. After about the third massive blow, the rusted lock gave out. The door violently smashed wide open. Luke didn't wait for that thing to step into the room. Beside himself with primal fear, he sprinted toward the broken window. He vaulted through the splintered frame and landed hard on the muddy ground outside. And in that exact second, he heard a heart-rending, agonizing scream from Tommy echoing out of the pitch-black cabin. A wet, tearing sound followed. At this point of the story, Luke's voice cracked and his hands were shaking so badly he had to put his drink down. I swear tears welled up in his eyes. Luke ran. How he made it home through the dense pitch-black woods, he couldn't remember himself. Branches whipped his face, tearing his skin, but he didn't stop once. He lay in his bed the entire night, paralyzed, without closing his eyes. Morning finally came. Someone knocked aggressively on Luke's door. It was Tommy's mother. She was in panic. She said that her son came home near dawn, barely alive. His hair, which had been dark brown the day before, had turned completely stark white. When asked what happened, he just mumbled incoherently, stared at his hands, and shook violently. She looked Luke dead in the eyes and asked the question, "Do you know what happened to him out there?" And Luke lied. He swallowed his guilt, said he had no idea, and claimed he had basically sat at home alone all night. From that very day, Tommy completely withdrew into his own mind. He stopped talking, stopped eating, and stopped communicating with anyone, including his own mother. He just stared blankly at the wall, rocking back and forth. A week later, he was taken to the psychiatric asylum, and they keep him there to this day, heavily medicated in the locked ward. The only person in the world besides me that Luke ever dared to tell this story to was his sister Chloe. And thank God she was one of those rare girls who knows how to keep a dark secret. I was the second, and most likely the absolute last person Luke told this horrific truth to, because exactly 2 weeks after our conversation on that lake, Luke died in a horrific, fatal motorcycle crash on an empty night highway. They say he swerved off the cliff like he was trying to avoid something standing in the middle of the road. Why he told this story specifically to me, a city guy he had only known for a couple of weeks, I don't know. Probably it was just eating away at his soul. The guilt was gnawing him alive from the inside. He needed to confess it to someone, because if he told his local friends, they would have killed him for abandoning Tommy in that cabin, and the whole town would panic knowing what roams in their woods. Luke knew I was leaving soon and wouldn't tell anyone. To believe in the God-man or not to believe, that is a personal choice for everyone. But looking into Luke's haunted eyes that day, I believed it all.